turn my phone on so this phone doesn't die after just 30 or 40 minutes. Okay. There. Okay, let's take it off there because it's gonna see here. Off that. That one open, that one open. All right, we're live, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Oh, sorry. I'm so used to that. Shalom, everyone. No, it's not the Sabbath. I'm not trying to confuse anyone. It's just I'm so used to honestly doing this on Shabbats and Shabbat evenings, Shabbat days. Anyway, Shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug. Right now, I'm kind of doing a quote-unquote re-recording of a new moon study that we did roughly about a day or two ago. My mom and I were on Zoom. We were doing our new moon study, so we're just going to be re-recording it basically. So anyone that's new to the channel, we're a Messianic congregation. The Awakened by Yahuwah is the name of the channel. We're a fellowship. We're kind of like a small house-to-house fellowship. Messianic believers of the whole Bible, the whole scripture. So what we're going to do today is, after I give you guys a quick introduction on these manuscripts, I'm going to show you guys. All right. No, it's okay. I wanted you to do that anyway, Mom. I wanted to make sure that the audio was coming through. No, you need the sound on to check anyway. So that's fine. Yeah, my mom was just double checking that the audio is coming through on the other side because obviously the other day it wasn't. So we're going to be doing a study called Areas in the Scriptures in the Tanakh that the Targums, the Aramaic Targums, the Samaritan Pentateuch, aka the Samaritan Torah, and other manuscripts that are like those, like the Peshitta and others, certain areas that they agree with the Septuagint over the Masoretic text. Right now, I want to give you guys a little crash course. You know those funny little yellow books, like This for Dummies, those type of books. I'm going to give you guys manuscripts for dummies right now. Okay, this is how it goes. Okay, so to give you a chronological order of the Old Testament manuscripts, here we go. First things first, the Septuagint, 300 BC. A general of Alexander the Great, one of his 4 generals that was prophesied in the book of Daniel, had a son. His name was Ptolemy Philadelphus. Ptolemy the First was one of those 4 horns, okay, in that prophecy, okay? So Ptolemy's son, you could call him Ptolemy Jr. if you want, he commissioned the Septuagint in 300 BC, roughly around, which means 300 years before Messiah, before Christ, okay? So 300 years before Yahushua's first coming, he was the guy in Hellenistic Alexandria, Egypt, to put forth this job for the scriptures at that time, which was only written in Paleo-Hebrew at that point. Even the Hebrew we have today did not exist as a language. There was only Paleo-Hebrew or pictograph, which is like hieroglyphics, is a little bit older. But the Paleo-Hebrew scriptures that Yahuwah gave to Moshe to write down and the original prophets to write down, the original scriptures at that time were translated into what we call today Koine Greek, okay? Just like the New Testament is in Koine Greek, okay? They got translated in roughly between near 300 BC. I think it was finished in within 200 years. They finished the whole Tanakh. It was like 300 BC to 100 BC. That is the oldest manuscript we have today. So on your chronological order list, you could put number 1, Septuagint. Number 2, Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not a complete Old Testament, but they're a good reference when you look at the history of what's happened to Yahuwah's word and how the Masoretes have changed things. Okay, so the Dead Sea Scrolls are very close to the age of the Septuagint. They as well, depending on what scroll you look at, range from 3rd century BC to 1st century BC. Now, after that, there's going to be a gap between that and there's going to be a little bit of a gap because the third most ancient manuscript we know of is the Peshitta and the Samaritan Torah. So I would put Samaritan Torah number 3 in your numerical list. Samaritan Torah is rumored to be 1st century BC as well. Now, once you get past those 3 oldest manuscripts, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls, LXX, Samaritan Pentateuch, or SPE as an abbreviation. Once you get past those 3, you have to go into the AD time period, the Common Era time period, as some call it. The Common Era time period, the earliest you have is the Peshitta Old Testament. The Aramaic Peshitta Old Testament is about roughly around 1st century CE AD. Okay, so 100 AD about. Then you fast forward, the earliest after that would be what's known as the Aramaic Targums. Even though people claim they predated the Septuagint orally, we're not talking about orally. We're not talking about oral tradition. We're talking about physically written down, okay? Physically written down, they're roughly around the 4th or 5th oldest manuscripts. So as far as types of manuscripts, they're like the 5th oldest, okay? The Targums are rumored to be written down. They started from about 100 AD to 500 AD. That's roughly the time period. Now, if you fast forward from that to modern day source, the only modern day source we have, the only modern manuscript you have is the Masoretic text, which is used in most modern Bibles today. There's about a 500 to 700 gap, 500 to 700 year gap between all those first 4 or 5 manuscripts I mentioned and the Masoretic text, the Masoretic text. So what you have to understand is this is why there's such a big difference, because Masoretic text is so new. You could say that it's only roughly 400 or 500 years before the Middle Ages. It was compiled only like 400 or 500 years before the Middle Ages. So again, it's very modern, and we're going to see what happens when it's a little too modern, and how it also is a problem when the actual authors of it depart from the original source material of all these prior manuscripts that they would have already had to look at, especially the Targums. You can go to encyclopediabritannica.com, and clearly it shows that the Masoretes would have been aware of the Targums. They were almost like pharisaical scribes that tried their best to reproduce. I want to put air quotes here, reproduce the original text. They did not have the original text. That's what most people are unaware of, okay? The authors of the Septuagint in 300 BC had the original text. From 300 BC to 1100 AD, over 1,000-year gap, the original scriptures were lost. Multiple scholars claim this. I'm not making this up. You can research it for yourself. The original Paleo-Hebrew scriptures between 3rd century BC and 11th century AD, that gap of time, somewhere the original scriptures got lost. We don't have the original scriptures. All we have is these older manuscripts that I talked about. So this is the point of this study today, to show you why our fellowship is so pro-Septuagint. This is kind of an introduction to the Septuagint, to those that don't know about it. And for those that want to research it for themselves and test it for themselves, it was also known as the Bible of the Apostles. And that I mean that it was literally the Bible that it was the Old Testament Yahushua would have been using, the apostles would have been using, Stephen would have been using, Paul would have been using, all of them would have been using the Septuagint, and there would have been no other option around that time other than possibly those that adhered to the Targums in the synagogue. Because the Targums, like I said, originated orally in the synagogue as a oral Aramaic interpretive translation of the scrolls that were being read out loud. So just to explain how the Targums started, just to give you a crash course on that, the Targums originally were orally interpretive versions of the Tanakh say like I have someone next to me, right? Say my mom's reading from the Paleo Hebrew Scroll at the podium, right? I would be what's called a maturgiman, which is a professional interpreter of the Torah. So I would be helping the Aramaic speaking community that doesn't speak the language my mom's reading from. I would be orally translating it. So that's how the Aramaic Targums started. And then, obviously later on, they became a lot more looser, like scripture plus commentary, but that's neither here nor there. So just to explain to you guys that and give you a crash course on that. Okay, so we're going to start off here with Genesis 2:2. So we'll start off with Genesis 2:2. So Genesis 2:2 says, hold on. Why do you give me so much trouble, you stupid shared screen? Okay, hold on, guys. It's always got to have issues with this phone, huh? Okay. So Genesis 2:2. We're going to look at the first major error that the Masoretic text does. Okay. Genesis 2:2. And Alua finished on the sixth day his works which he made, and he ceased from the seventh day from all his works which he made. Perfectly makes sense, right? He stopped at the end of the sixth day so he could rest on the seventh. What happens with the Masoretic, though? What does the Masoretic do here? Okay. On the seventh day, Elohim ended his work, which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had made. Biggest problem here. Okay, just using common sense, 1 + 1 is 2, guys, right? Okay. If he's still working partially on the seventh day, how is he going to rest for the whole seventh day? He can't do that. So again, the Masoretes changed the word sixth to seventh. Why would they do that? Maybe they had a tradition of only resting for 12 hours. There's many people in this walk that don't keep a full 24-hour Sabbath. And many of those in this walk would, and I'm not even trying to make fun, but I'm just trying to be honest here. Many people in this walk that hold to that a day is only 12 hours most likely can only use the Masoretic version of Genesis 2:2 for that. Because if you take the Septuagint version, it shows he was resting for a whole 24 hours. Why? Because it says he finished his work on which day? The sixth. So Hebraically, he started resting at the end of the sixth day into the end of the seventh, hence 24 hours. Okay, so there's no loophole around that. Now the Masoretic gives you a little loophole because it says he finished his work on the seventh day. So someone could say, well, he only rested for half of the day. You see what I'm saying there? Now, as added support that the Masoretic has it wrong, here we have here the Samaritan Torah. Okay, and on the sixth day, Elohim ended his work. So again, Samaritan Torah, 100 BC, agrees with the Septuagint, 300 BC. And just for a third witness, because what does Scripture say? 2 or 3 witnesses, yes. Right? This is a English translation of the Peshitta Torah. What does it say? On the sixth day, he finished his work. So again, 3 verses 1. So this is what I mean by there has been some things that have been corrupted in the Masoretic text, and we have to be aware of these things. Okay, so now to the next cross-reference here, we have Genesis 6:3. 6:3 is not as a big change, but it still leaves a little bit of leeway. Now, I would like to look into, did the Masoretes believe in the angel interpretation? I just want to look at this real quick because they do. It seems like the only version that says sons of Elohim in that verse is the Masoretic. So I'm kind of wondering if they were Sethite theorists. Did the Masoretes believe in the angel interpretation of Genesis 6. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing online that could indicate that's the case. Now, my thing is, though, there was an interpretation. I remember someone else bringing this up in their own video. There was someone else that brought this up, that before the Sethite view was even created, Judaism had their own version of it. They didn't call it the Sethite view. They called it the religious nobles, right, Mom? Mm-hmm. That's what Jim said, the religious noble theory. So I would be interested to see how far back that religious nobles theory goes with the rabbis. I wonder if it's somewhere around the 9th or 10th century. I'd be just curious. But either way, the point I'm trying to make here is, if you look at the LXX of Genesis 6:3, in the Greek, in the original Greek, it says Angelos Theos. Okay, so which in English would be angels of Elua, angels of Elohim. So the angels of Elohim went into the daughters of humans. Okay, now the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan also references it, interprets it, paraphrases it as angels. It actually word for word would say that Samyaza and Uziel, who fell from heaven, was in the earth in those days and after that. So what they did, what the Pseudo-Jonathan does in Genesis 6:3, it paraphrases B'nai Elohim, sons of Elohim, as angels. So you have two ancient versions. Now we can agree, disagree all day whether those names, Samyaza and the other guy that comes from Jewish folklore, that Uziel guy comes from Jewish folklore, whether that it should read it exactly as that, that's a whole story for another day. But the point is that the author of a Targum agrees with the LXX, agrees with how it reads in the Septuagint. That's the point. We can argue all day whether, a name of a fallen angel from Enoch should be in the text or not, as Samyaza is from the book of Enoch. So we can agree to disagree all day with that. But the point is, that's how it reads. It does not say sons of Elohim. It's more specific. That's the point. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 10, verse 9. I'm going to show you guys something here on my screen. So we're going to go to my sword here. We're going to look into the actual Hebrew and the Greek here. So this is where people get confused. They say, well, there's no proof Nimrod rebelled, yada, yada, yada. The Hebrew says that he was before Yahuwah. Okay, which is true. But that's why we're going to look at the Septuagint here, the Greek of the Septuagint, okay? Now, there's a couple of differences here with the translation, okay? The Septuagint says he was a giant hunter, meaning a hunter of giants. And this is the word that everyone says is supposed to be before. Strong's G1726, the Greek word is enantion. Enantion means to be over, against, opposite, contrary. How translators get that definition and decide to keep it as before, like the Masoretic, boggles my mind. I don't understand it. So, anyway, so that's one of my proofs. Now, I can even go to one of the Targums I have here to show you there's two witnesses of this that I should say against, not before. Okay, it says, in Targum Onkelos, it says, he was a powerful man before Yahuwah. Therefore, it says, like Nimrod, the man of might before Yahuwah. Now, the Targum Onkelos still uses the word before, but as we see in the Greek, it's supposed to say against. Now, the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum would actually more give off the idea that he rebelled. So the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum is the one that actually agrees with the Septuagint. The Pseudo-Jonathan one says that he was mighty in rebellion and he was mighty in sin. Okay? So that's the point I'm trying to make there. Even though the Onkelos, you could say, might agree with the Masoretic, the problem is that we don't have the Aramaic We don't have an Aramaic lexicon to see what the actual word is in the Aramaic, because all these translators translate that word as before. Regardless of the manuscript, the majority of the translators want to mistranslate it as before. So anyway, Genesis 49 verse 10, the Septuagint says expectation of nations. The Targums say King Messiah. So when you look at Genesis 49 verse 10 in both versions, it makes it very clear, guys, that it makes it extremely clear that the this verse is talking about Yahusha. It's not talking about a regular mortal man. Okay. This is the authors of the Targums believed in a celestial divine Messiah, a supernatural a Messiah that had a supernatural nature, rather than what the Masoretes believed, which is just some guy that's going to bring peace. Okay. So in my personal opinion, from what it looks like, Genesis 49:10, the Septuagint and the Targum agree with one another that this person is talking about is the Savior. Genesis 49:10 is specifically talking about the Savior, the Messiah. Okay. It's not talking about just some random person from Judah that's going to bring you peace, which is what the Masoretic says. Okay. And again, another Targum. So this is 3 witnesses here versus 2 at best. And like I said, we don't even know if the Targum on Kalos is supposed to say before or not. Like I said before, you would have to just trust the translator at that point, because there is no Aramaic concordance of the Targums that I am aware of anyway. So, but let's just say that the Masoretic has the Onkelos agree with them. The problem is that you have the Septuagint saying different. You have the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum saying different. So that's 2 versus 2 at that point for Genesis 10, 8-9. And you have a third witness to side with the Septuagint here. The Jerusalem Targum says that he was mighty in hunting and in sin before Elua. Even though it says before, it says that he was mighty in sin. He was rebelling. Okay. So the LXX version of Genesis 10, 8-9 seems to be more accurate than the Masoretic. And then we go to Exodus 4, verse 24, where this is the famous verse everyone gets confused about, because, right, Moses forgot to circumcise his son. And then supposedly Zipporah gets mad at Moses for having their son circumcised, even though Moses was the one in sin. So it confuses you in the narrative, because it's like, why is Zipporah getting mad? And then when you find out who the Midianites were, that the Midianites were not really of a Gentile culture. They knew about the Torah, supposedly, because they were from Ishmael, if I'm not mistaken. They descended from Ishmael, okay? And supposedly they would have been worshipers of Yahuwah as well. Even some of the Jewish traditions, right, Mom, usually portray them as knowing Yahuwah and knowing that it was Yahuwah's mountain there. So it's like, okay, they're acquainted with his ways. They know who he is. Why is she mad that he had to circumcise her son? It doesn't make sense. You're a bloody husband to me, is what the Masoretic says in that verse. Now, if you look at all the other versions, it says the blood is staunched, okay, is what the LXX says, meaning the blood has stopped. Now, you could interpret that as she's talking about it has atoned for the blood of her, rather than the Yahusha killing her husband, which would cause bloodshed. It's staunched because the blood of the circumcision of her child has atoned for her husband's sin, which, by the way, that's what the Targum, Pseudo-Jonathan, and the Jerusalem both say. It's the blood of atonement, rather than you're a bloody husband to me. So again, another point there that the Masoretic changes the verse to make it not make any sense. Now, here's one of the biggest problems I have with the Masoretic. There's certain things the Masoretic does to change the text, okay? To change history, to change historical events, okay? So Exodus 12, verse 40, right? If you look at Exodus 12:40 in almost every other version, now I know of at least 3 different versions that disagree with the Masoretic. The Septuagint, the Samaritan Torah, and the Pseudo-Jonathan Targum all say Canaan and Egypt for 430 years. Now the Pseudo-Jonathan gets kind of like paraphrasing. It will say 200 and something for Canaan and 200 and something for Egypt to combine for 430, but it's still saying the same thing. The Masoretic says that they were only in Egypt for 430 years. The problem with that is you go to the book of Acts, Stephen makes it clear that they were not in Egypt for 430 years. Why do I say that? Because he writes from the covenant of Abraham to the giving of the law at Sinai was 430 years. Now, how would that work if they were only in Egypt for the 430 years? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Then you would have to say Stephen's wrong, the New Testament is wrong, then you got to throw out the New Testament. So obviously there's an agenda there. Obviously there's an agenda. Now, also, Yahuwah's bringing to remembrance to me another bullet point I should have had here was another thing the Masoretes changed is they changed the death of Shem. They take out that Shem died. So I'm going to show you guys something here. I believe it's chapter 11 that it talks about him dying. Okay, so Shem died. Okay, maybe it's Genesis 10. Let me just see here. Okay. All right. Let me just see here. And Shem, let's see here. And Shem died. Genesis, I forget if it's 11 or 10. Ooh. Here we go. Yeah. So Genesis 11. Okay, so Genesis 11, 10 to 26. So that's what we're trying to find here, guys. So Genesis 11. Okay. Trying to see where exactly talks about Shem's death here. Here we go. Now, if you go to the Septuagint here, it says here, this part is taken out and died in Genesis 11:11. Mm-hmm. If you look at the LXX, it says, Shem lived after he had begotten Arphaxad 500 years and begot sons and daughters and what? And died. So what does that mean? That means that post Genesis 11, he's not alive anymore. He can't meet Abraham. He can't be Melchizedek. Okay? Samaritan Torah, right? Let's get a second witness. And Shem lived after he begot Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And they were all the days of Shem 600 years. And he died. That's it. He can't know Abraham. He can't know Jacob. He can't know any of the other patriarchs. Why? Because he's asleep at that point. He has gone to Sheol at that point. Now, the problem is the Masoretic decides to take that part out. So now you think, fast forward 3 chapters later, somehow this guy is still living at possibly at 800 years old. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, guys. No one was living past 600 after the flood. That was not happening. Noah did not live that long, okay? So Shem's not some crazy Superman that's going to live to 800-900 years old. Mm-hmm. Why would the Masoretes take that phrase and he died out. Why? Because they did not believe in Yahusha. They did not believe in the New Testament. So what does that mean? They don't believe he's Melchizedek. So what do? They take that little phrase out. They take away from the scriptures so that they can fit this little rabbinical tale, this Mishnaic, Talmudic tale that Shem would have lived long enough to meet Abraham. Mm-hmm. There is no proof in scripture that him and Abraham ever met, or even would have been in the same generation. Obviously, Abraham would not be in the same generation. You got how many generations after him until Abraham? You got Arphaxad, you got Selah. That's already 2 generations. You got Eber, 3 generations. Okay. You got Peleg is 4 generations. Reu would be 5. Sarug is 6. Nahor is 7. Terah's 8. So we could even make the case it's physically impossible for him to have ever known Abraham, because you're talking about almost 9 generations. Mm-hmm. And let's just do the math here, Mom. Let's just give benefit of doubt, right? That what David said is a law for what a generation is, right? Mm-hmm. What would 70 times 9 be? 630 years. So you're telling me he's going to live another 630 years and be 1,200 years old? No. This is why Paul mentioned, beware of those teaching you Jewish fables and all that. And I believe possibly when he talks about endless genealogies, he's talking about these rabbis that are trying to change the genealogies and all that. Sorry, but I get passionate about that. Yes, it pisses me off about that. Okay, so anyway, so I need to add that Genesis 11:11 has an issue there as well. So guys, we've already done like 4 or 5 cross references here that show that these are major doctrines that have been changed. These are major issues that have been changed. Okay, so I'll put LXX / SPE, which again, guys, SPE just means Samaritan Pentateuch in English. Both say, and Shem died. Okay. All right. We talked about Exodus 4. We talked about Exodus 12 before. That must be a typo, because I could have swore we just talked about that. Okay. So, all right. Now we're going to go to Deuteronomy 32:8. Okay. Deuteronomy 32:8 in the Septuagint reads as follows. Okay. Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. This is how the Septuagint reads. It says, when the Most High divided the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam. Okay, what event is this? Separating the sons of Adam, the descendants of Noah. This is talking about the Tower of Babel. When he set the boundaries of the nations according to the numbers of the angels of Elohim. So what is this talking about? This is talking about principalities. He put a principality for each 70 countries or nations. Okay, that's what the Septuagint says. Now, if you have a Masoretic text Bible, they have changed this original reading to the number of the sons of Israel. Now, what's the problem here? Was Jacob alive at the Tower of Babel? No, he wasn't. So is this historically accurate? No, this is wrong. Okay, how do I know it's wrong? The LXX says angels. The Dead Sea Scrolls of this verse says angels. And the Targums, one of the Targums, the Pseudo-Jonathan one, says angels. It actually paraphrases to say that he put 70 angels over the 70 nations. So again, you have 3 witnesses against 1 or possibly 2. If you want to say that one of the Targums says sons of Israel, that's fine. But you still have 3 versus 2 witnesses. So the Septuagint still wins out with having 3 witnesses saying angels, okay? Deuteronomy 4, verse 33. Okay. Deuteronomy 4, verse 33 says, okay, the biggest problem you're going to see here is that most people will probably not think this is an issue, but I'm going to show you guys how this can be a major issue. It says here, did ever people hear the voice of Elohim speaking out of the midst of fire, as you have heard and lived? Why do I think this is an issue? Because those that want to do linguistic games with the Hebrew language and say, well, Elohim doesn't have to mean the Father. Elohim is sometimes used for angels in Psalms 82. So it's just saying that a mighty one spoke to Israel out of the fire. Now, with the Septuagint or the Samaritan Torah, you cannot say that. Okay, I'm going to show you something here. It says, if a nation has heard the voice of what? The living Elohim. Is an angel the living Elohim? No. Is a regular celestial being the living Elohim, the living Alua? No. Speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and have lived. So the Septuagint is making it very obvious that it is mentioning Yahuwah here as the living Elohim, but the Masoretic takes out the word the living there, and all it has is Elohim. So you have to use eisegetical interpretation either way. Now, the Samaritan Torah here gives a second witness to the Septuagint and says, did people hear the voice of the living Elohim speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and live? Now, again, it says the living Elohim. It does not say just Elohim. And again, unfortunately, anything past the Septuagint or Samaritan Torah is going to say just the voice of Elohim, unfortunately. But to me, it's important that it says the voice of the living Elohim, both in the Samaritan Torah and in the Septuagint in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 33. The Masoretic just says Elohim. It doesn't say the living. The problem is that there's a difference. Yes, Elohim can also mean angels, and that's the problem. So someone could say, oh, that just means a messenger spoke to them out of the fire. That's the problem. But when you have the phrase, the living mighty one, you got to throw angels out. It can no longer be just an angel. This is where I think we have to understand who the Masoretes were and what their agenda is. See, later on, guys, the rabbis, when they rejected the word made flesh, when they rejected Yahusha, eventually their interpretation of some of the scriptures, they had to change. Because believe it or not, the rabbis of the first century AD and prior to that, in the intertestamental period, those scribes knew who the angel of Yahuwah was. This was not debatable. It was not debatable back then. They knew the angel of Yahuwah. They knew it so much. Guess what they paraphrased the angel of Yahuwah as in the Targums universally? The word of Yahuwah. So there was no debate in the first century. No debate. But what happens? The word made flesh comes in the first century. After the first century, they reject the word made flesh. They reject the person that is Malach Yahuwah or the messenger of Yahuwah. So then they have to create this false character. In the Kabbalah, they call him Metatron. They have to create this counterfeit Yahusha guy. And so now, whenever it's talking about the angel of Yahuwah, eisegetically in their minds, in the modern rabbis' minds of today, when they see the angel of the Lord or the angel of Yahuwah, they think of Metatron. They think of this like just angel, celestial being that is an ambassador of the Father. They don't interpret the messenger of Yahuwah in modern day as the Father like their ancestors would have. What I'm trying to say here is the early scribes, the early You know, if they want to call themselves rabbis, they're not my rabbi, but just saying the early scribes of the first century that Yahusha would have known and encountered knew that the messenger of Yahuwah was Yahuwah himself. But modern day, that theology has been thrown out. So that's most likely why Deuteronomy 4:33 says that Elohim spoke to them out of the fire. Why they would take away the phrase "the living" out of there is because if you have the word "the living" before the word Elohim, now it's talking about the Creator. Now you can't, you know, try to work your way around that because there's only one living Elohim. There's only one living Creator. So they had to take that phrase out. They had to. They had no choice. So anyway, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this type of study. I hope it was edifying. I hope you guys got something out of this. And like I always say, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to ask me questions. I don't care. You know, guys, I'm very lenient on the comments section. As long as you keep it respectable on YouTube, I don't care. If you got questions, ask them. But to me, these, 5 or 6 cross references we went through are major doctrines that have been altered in the Masoretic text, that haven't been changed to the point where it doesn't even make sense, where people have more questions about the Bible because it's been all, you know, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to put a wrong type of fear in you guys or doubt about Yahuwah's word, but we have to understand what a Bible is and what his eternal word that's physically in heaven is. We have to understand the difference. A Bible is a translation. A Bible is a translation of an earlier copy, of an earlier copy, of an earlier copy, of an earlier copy. What we have today as a physical Bible, whether you read from a Jewish Bible, Christian Bible, it is a copy of 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 a copy. So we can't lie to ourselves and say we have the original source physically that we're reading from. Yahuwah is the original source. Yahusha is the original source. That's why I'm a big advocate. Even when you read from whatever Bible you're using, I'm not saying throw it out, but pray before you read. Yahuwah might show you something, be like, you know, nudge you spiritually, be like, look up this verse. Look up this verse in a different version. Look up this verse on the internet. See what it's talking about. What is the context? You know, pray to the Father. Ask for his ask him to reveal to you the context of what you're reading. Because I'm telling you right now, guys, there is no perfect version of the Bible that we have today. That, and I'm trying to love you enough and be honest with you to tell you that.
Yeah.
Okay. Throw out your Baptist upbringing. That the King James is inerrant. Okay. The manuscripts that the King James used was not even inerrant. So how would the King James get it perfectly if he's using the Masoretic text in his Old Testament, especially in the Old Testament of the King James? There's no way you can say that's a perfect Bible. There's no way. No. So this whole idea of, you know, the Bible is literally equal to his eternal word in heaven. That's not true. What a Bible is, guys, it's a physical copy of the original source that's in heaven. That's what the Bible is. Just to explain to you simple history, okay? The original scriptures were given to Moses by Yahuwah, the original, which we don't have, okay? So what we have today is a 10th, 20th hand-me-down copy of that original scripture that Yahuwah gave to Moses and the prophets and the apostles that Yahuwah inspired them to write. What we have is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So the point of this study is not to get you discouraged. The point of this study is to get you to start seeking for his word like treasure. Start seeking for the purest form, purest copy of his original word. That's the point of this study. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone. I'm not trying to get you guys to lose faith in the scriptures, but I am trying to get you guys to think for yourself and trying to help you guys unlearn this man-made Christian tradition that the Bible has never been changed. That's a lie. It's a lie. It keeps you in a false sense of security so you don't look at any other manuscripts. It's a false sense of security so that you stay using one single Bible your whole life and you don't look into other translations or other manuscripts. That's all that is. And it's just going to keep you in that false sense of security rather than trying to dig for his word like treasure, which is actually what it says in his word, right? It says wisdom is what? Like fine gold. There's nothing that can compare to wisdom. Wisdom is his word. So you should be seeking it for it like treasure rather than, okay, I have a decent King James. I'm going to stick with this, or a decent NIV and I don't need nothing but an NIV. That's what the devil wants you to do. He doesn't want you seeking for Yahuwah's word like treasure. He doesn't want you doing that. He wants you to be content with these modern 1970s, Middle Ages copies of the original word that honestly, even with English translations, you're never going to have a perfect Bible. English translators have done their best. A lot of them have done their best. A lot of them are not trying to, attack, but they did not know the original languages as much as they thought they did. Okay? We're learning more and more about the Greek and the Hebrew languages that these prior translators were ignorant about certain words. And they didn't know the language so much that when they came across a Greek word, I just researched this recently, a couple of years ago. When they found out about a Greek or Hebrew word they didn't know, they just guessed or just left it out. So there's certain verses in your English Bibles that don't even have the full verse translated, that they leave certain words in a verse that they can translate, they just leave out. They omit. So this is what I'm saying. Do your due diligence. What does Paul say to us? Study to show yourself true. Studying is not just, okay, for surface level reading an English translation and then ending it with that. No, study means look into the original languages. Look into the Greek. Look into the Hebrew. Try to research and find older manuscripts. That is our job. That's what it means to study. Anyway, so thank you guys for joining. Whoever watched this, I know that was for someone out there. And shalom, everyone. Happy I hope you guys are having a great new moon. And that's about it. Have a good night, everyone. See you next time, Yahuwah willing.